The UK has moved to ban advertising for junk food from television until after children have gone to bed and completely online. The British government says it will prevent 20,000 cases of obesity every year and save the National Health Service billions of pounds. But will it really work? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, 1 in 10 school entry age children in Britain are obese. This statistic has led to the UK government banning advertising for foods that are high in saturated fat, salt and sugar. The aim is to tackle the obesity crisis before it gets any worse. So, can an advertising ban actually make children healthier?
Colourful, irresistible and mouth-watering. For years, children have been bombarded with junk food advertisements, from fizzy drinks to popular chocolate brands. Now, the UK is banning adverts for unhealthy foods from both television and online before 9 p.m, in an attempt to tackle rising childhood obesity. Food and drinks high in fat, salt and sugar, including sweets and unhealthy kids' meals, are being targeted, although billboard adverts are excluded from the ban.
Children of a young age are unable to discern the difference between advert and information, and where they're constantly being bombarded by products for high energy and high sugar, it almost normalizes it for them to be drinking it even though they're not hungry. So definitely there is a role for introducing an advertising ban.
The government hopes this regulation will remove up to 7.2 billion calories from children's diets each year and help parents raise healthier children. But does the public think it will make a difference?
No young people today watches TV, so banning the ads is going to be absolutely stupid.
Exposure at home is more important. What parents eat will affect their children much more. And also exposure at schools.
I think if you want to eat junk food, you've got to eat junk food. Doesn't matter if there's ads or not.
Obesity rates continue to climb across Europe, with 1 in 3 primary school children either overweight or obese, while 11% are obese. Boys are more affected than girls. Obesity puts children at risk of serious health issues in childhood or later in life, from type 2 diabetes, heart disease and cancers. The UK joins Portugal, which has had a similar ban in place since 2019. Sweden and Norway also have limits on junk food advertising for children. But can advertising restrictions really tackle childhood obesity?
Well, let's meet our guests on this one. Joining me in the studio, I'm delighted to say we have Johanna Anderson. She is Marketing Director at For Change Marketing. Chris Walker is Director of Public and External Affairs at the Advertising Association. In Northamptonshire, in England, we have Catherine Brown. She is Professor of Behaviour Change in Health. That's at the University of Hertfordshire. And in London, Marilia Chamon. She is a registered nutritional therapist. You're all very welcome to this roundtable. Marilia, I'll come to you first. Just spell out for us why the UK government has had to do this.
Well, the aim is to reduce children's exposure to constant food advertising. And it's not about banning treats. It's about turning down the volume, because children are being constantly exposed to high sugar and high fat foods through TV advertising and online, of course.
Thank you. Catherine, to you. This has taken quite a long time to do this. Give us your observations.
Yeah, I mean, we've had problems with rising rates of overweight and obesity in the population across the UK. It's not unique to us. It happens across entire nations around the globe. But this has been going on in terms of steady increases for 30 years or more. Since the early 90s, the UK-based government has been attempting to put in place various obesity strategies and policies. They have to date had very limited effect, but what we see with this new piece of legislation is a step in the right direction, at least. It's taken some time. It always takes government a long time to pass new legislation and to get all the people around the table to agree to certain things to happen. But we know in the case of this particular ban on the advertising of foods high in fat, salt, sugar, etc., that the food industry has been lobbying quite significantly and causing some delays in government in the processes as well.
Thank you. Johanna, give us your reading of this. How has this gone down in the world of marketing and advertising?
I don't think it's a surprise, really. There's been a lot of talk about this, and it's been a long time coming, really. But I think brands have started to adapt because really and truly, it's not applying to all forms of advertising and marketing. It's applying to TV advertising before 9 p.m. and digital advertising at all times throughout the day. But brands are starting to shift their strategies. They're moving into focusing on brand marketing, to influencers, to sports sponsorships. So I think they're starting to adapt, maybe not so in the most positive way, but I think it's still early days. So we'll see where it's heading.
And Chris, what's going on in the advertising industry? Because this is big money.
It is. I mean, the advertising industry's really adapted to these changes. We've been waiting for the government, it was mentioned by Catherine, for quite some time now to get the guidance in place, working really closely with the government, with the Advertising Standards Authority as the regulator to make sure that we were compliant from day one. So it came in a couple of weeks ago now. So you hopefully see high compliance rates across the industry. We didn't necessarily want these changes to come into effect. The evidence doesn't necessarily support that this is going to have as big an impact as people claim it will. But now that it is in effect, we're working closely with the government and the regulator to make sure we've got high compliance.
Were you surprised that they did this?
Not surprised that they did this. As was mentioned by one of the other contributors, the government has been looking to pull whatever levers they can to affect childhood obesity rates. The evidence shows this will have a very minimal effect, about 3 calories a day per child, which is the equivalent of about half a Smartie. So in terms of overall obesity rates within children, we don't expect it to have much of an impact. But no, they've been talking about this since Theresa May government back in 2019. So it's been a long time coming.
It's taken that long to implement?
Yeah.
Wow, 7 years. Marilia, I was quite surprised looking at some of the list of foods. I mean, we all know chocolate and cake and pizza. We know what's bad for us, clearly. We know that these are meant to be occasional treats. However, I looked at some of the lists. Brands of breakfast cereal are on there, some types of porridge, sandwiches, even yogurts. I mean, some of these foods are all full of sugar and we don't really realize it.
Yes, absolutely. Some of the foods are surprising because they are marketed as healthy. So as you said, cereals, porridges, yogurts, and when we look closely, many of them have high levels of added sugar or are very energy dense for portion size. So the packaging can be misleading and harder to make informed choices.
And Marilia, we've all been there in supermarkets or in shops with small children nagging and having seen stuff on TV. Pester power obviously works, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where understanding, that it's not a full ban, but as you said, knowing when and how to eat it is so important, and not just relying on those items as the core of someone's diet.
Catherine, you know what is good for the body and what we shouldn't be consuming, but I think for far too long, certainly in the United Kingdom, people have been eating a lot of the wrong stuff, haven't they? Looking at diets and the increase of saturated fats, sugars, a lot of these foods just aren't good for children.
No, and there's growing evidence as well around ultra-processed foods and the fact that the food industry is aware that when they make certain amendments and adaptations to foods, that increases their palatability. And there's also evidence that it increases the amount of it that we will consume. So our kind of natural feeling of fullness is postponed by the response that our body has to ultra-processed foods. And when we're talking about ultra-processed foods, the best way to understand what those are when you look at the ingredients list on a packet of something that you're going to buy. If you don't recognize some of those ingredients, then it's likely to be an ultra-processed food. Trying to think about whole foods, foods that come in their more natural state or have limited processing to get them to the state that they're in, is going to be much better for you. And you're going to be able to manage much better the amount of it that you consume and kind of stay within normal guidance and kind of listen to your body's response to those foods.
Thanks, Catherine. Johanna, you mentioned how brands are responding, working with influencers. Do you think that is where they will move? Like the budgets will go to smarter ways of getting their message across?
100%. I think it's going to be a mix of things. Outdoor advertising is something that's currently not regulated. Just on my walk across London on the way here, I saw several ads kind of not complying with the new legislation. I think with influencers in particular, there's just no real crackdown on disclaimers. So I think that's potentially something that brands will lean into and use user-generated content just to kind of get their products out there in a more subtle way, while still pushing their brand through the traditional channels such as TV and digital ads.
Chris, just how powerful do you think advertising on TV has been for foods that are not good for us? I mean, let's call it what they are, junk food.
Well, there's been restrictions in place since 2007, and just to gently push back on what you were saying around unrestricted channels, these rules affect all channels. So there have been rules in place around high fat, salt, sugar foods since 2007 on TV and since 2017 on all media types, so online, out of home, cinema, print, etc. And those have really strict criteria around where you can and can't show ads that may be seen by children. So out of home, for example, there are strict rules around schools. You can't show them with 100 meters of a boundary of a school. And there is a 25% audience threshold in other areas. So if the population that's watching it is over the age of 16, if 25% or more of that audience is over 16, you can't show HFSS adverts there. So there are already really strict regulations in place. This legislation then sits on top of it. The brands will continue to be allowed to do brand advertising. That's right. They'll also be allowed to continue to showcase the products that they've reformulated, their healthier options as well. So they will shift their spend to where they're allowed to, but stick strictly within the rules.
Thanks, Chris. Marilia, to you, just talk to me about the obesity crisis in the UK right now. So I've read these statistics from the UK government. They reckon 1 in 10 reception school-age children. So these are the smallest kids coming into education aged 5. 1 in 10 are obese. Children as young as 5, 1 in 5 of 5-year-olds have tooth decay. Something has really been a problem here for years, hasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And it tells us that the problem is starting extremely early. And I think what's concerning is that these patterns tend to persist. So children that start school entry at obese level are much more likely to remain obese later in childhood and adulthood, which of course increases long-term risks of obesity-related health conditions. So I think that it's absolutely a big issue.
Catherine, to you, what's your view on the prediction that this will stop 20,000 obesity cases a year in the United Kingdom?
Well, look, we know that the costs to the NHS of treating obesity and obesity-related conditions are extremely high. So we're getting estimates of around kind of £12 billion a year and wider societal costs. So the importance of kind of dealing with this goes really far and wide. People are not able to necessarily work because of ill health and poor health and well-being. And there's a kind of critical factor here as well that we haven't touched on yet, which is the health inequality that's embedded into society through the marketing of these types of foods. People who live in the most deprived parts of our population and in our communities are far more likely to live with overweight and obesity, and therefore far more likely to experience the ill health consequences. They literally die up to 12 years earlier and live for longer with illness, disability, and mental health problems, all associated with this condition. I think sometimes we sort of think about this as very much an individualistic problem. It's framed that way an awful lot of the time. But the reality is, obesity is a really complex problem with many complex interrelated drivers. And we need to use, as was referred to earlier, every tool in the toolbox to try to tackle this. And this legislation represents one small but quite important step in the right direction to improving the food culture and the food environment of our country.
And Catherine, just give us your understanding of where the UK stands then in Western Europe. Do you think other countries are doing better in terms of tackling obesity, or is the UK really struggling on this?
Well, a really important movement in the last kind of few years, decade or so, is increasing interest in and implementation of something called whole systems approaches to tackling obesity. There's only a few instances around the world where we've got some emerging strong evidence. Amsterdam has had some success with really trying to make changes at multiple levels across their kind of environment, living conditions, working conditions, the spaces and the places and the environments people spend their time in. But they have had an impact on childhood obesity levels, rather, I should say. A couple of other instances of where there's been some success. And I really want to say something about how local authorities over the last 5 to 10 years in increasing numbers have been trying to implement these approaches locally to shift the system, the environment, the context in which we're all spending our living time, our working time, our playing and leisure time, to make a difference and make a change. What they've been lacking is important policy level support from government to help them shift in particular food environments. And this does mark an important step in supporting that more local level, community level work to make a change.
Thank you, Catherine. Johanna, you're originally from Sweden. Just give us a reading of what life is like there in terms of children and advertising for junk food on TV. Has Sweden tightened up on this previously?
I mean, I can't speak to the legislations in detail, but I think the school system plays a very important role here. And growing up in the Swedish educational system as well, I can kind of draw some differences between the two countries and how food and healthy foods influence our choices. And I read something about 30% of children's calorie intake come from what they eat at school. So I think indirectly that's advertising and marketing in disguise. It's not necessarily the brands paying for it, but it is, so in some instances, private schools and public schools feeding positive eating habits into children at an early age. Yeah.
Thank you. Chris, at what point do you think there may be an education campaign advertisers can get on board as well? I mean, we see celebrity chefs like Jamie Oliver who have had a lot to say about fizzy drinks, sweets, the way children's diets have gone in the UK. Do you think you might see in the advertising industry this year them getting behind an educational push?
I'd love to see that. I'd love to see the government stepping up into this space again. It's something that during the years of austerity, they really stepped away from through budget cuts and other means. And I think it's something they could really be investing positive money into. The evidence around ad bans is pretty weak, but the evidence for investing in those positive health campaigns is really strong. They do deliver, particularly in underprivileged areas, real differences to children's understanding of fruit and vegetables and what they should be eating. So yes, we have some industry-run campaigns already. We'd love to see more people getting involved with those. And we'd love to see the government step up to the plate as well.
So on behalf of the industry, you're saying that you're ready and willing. You just need someone in government to reach out?
Yeah, we'd love to work with the health department more closely on this and be able to develop some really interesting schemes. We've got the professionalism, they've got the knowledge base and the money to be able to put behind it. We'd love to work together on that.
Thanks, Chris. Marilia, just come in on that. How badly needed do you think that is in the UK right now to have, you know, solid education for working families to understand that feeding children some of these food items is just not good?
I think education is key. It's the absolutely most important factor for long-term results. And I think, it shouldn't be about labeling foods as good or bad. It should focus on helping people understand what real nutrition means and making better food choices, nourishing foods, balanced portion sizes, how everyday food affects energy, mental health, health over time. So I think education is absolutely the most important aspect.
And Marilia, as well, for a lot of families, it all comes down to cost. We're in a cost of living crisis. A lot of working families are really struggling. So do you think some movement on pricing would help?
Yeah, absolutely. We know that, sometimes buying what we call healthy foods is more expensive than buying junk food. So pricing is, of course, a contributing factor.
Catherine, just on that point as well, would you welcome some sort of UK-wide educational campaign where families can be told how to cook solid, nutritious food for children that's not going to cost the earth?
This I think is a really important point. And of course, I'd never say no, we shouldn't be educating people. Education is a good thing, but actually I think it's a slice of an important range of things potentially. We have been attempting to educate people about what constitutes healthy eating and what does not for many years, but we still have an obesity crisis. So again, that's not going to solve the problem. And I think one of the challenges with education as a sort of intervention strategy and approach is that it sort of further entrenches the belief that this is an individual level problem and that people need to take responsibility for it for themselves. And one of the challenges we've come up against as well is that we talk about and we discuss healthy versus unhealthy, but then we do see the food industry kind of using that a little bit to almost trick people into purchasing foods that they believe to be healthy. We talked earlier, you mentioned the surprise that you had around some of the things that counted as unhealthier, that were packed full of sugar, perhaps, that people wouldn't realize, and so on. And so when we put those educational messages out there, they can then be used and manipulated to some extent by those who are motivated by making profits out of the sale of food.
Thank you. Johanna, it's very interesting that the issues of smoking and alcohol, things that you really don't see advertised anymore, it's totally taboo now in the United Kingdom in many, many places. It strikes me the food industry, for everything they've been selling our young people and families, their luck has run out. Would you agree?
I think it's a tricky question. I think the issue around smoking, it has been going on for a much longer time. But if you look back 50 years, we were in a very much different position, and it's almost like frowned upon now. And I would like to think that in 50 years' time, we're going to look back and say the same thing about ultra-processed foods, fast food, junk food, etc. But I think it's too early to tell.
Chris, just come in on that. I mean, from the industry perspective, I know you can't criticize them because they pay a lot of money, but do you think this was kind of a slow bullet in the chamber, that it took a long time to be fired, but it's happening?
I don't, if I'm honest, because as I mentioned earlier on, we have really strong regulation in place already around this. Food is very different from smoking. We know that one cigarette is bad for you. One chocolate bar, one bag of crisps, or the occasional takeaway is not going to be detrimental to your long-term health in the same way as a cigarette would be. So I think there is a clear differentiation there with that. What we do know from learning from cigarettes is that the positive marketing campaigns in terms of getting people to stop smoking were really successful and played a key role in that.
Thank you. Marilia, for any parents who are watching who have, hand on heart, same here, given children food that is not perfect but is quick and gets you out of a hole, say after you've picked children up from school and they need something, what advice would you give to parents in terms of more nutritious food, stuff that can be put together very quickly and is going to do children some good and not ultimately destroy teeth and lead to obesity?
Yeah, I think, obviously leaving the cost issue aside, it's choosing foods as close to their natural form as possible. Because that's, will provide vitamins, minerals, protein, healthy fats, fiber, and everything that we need to keep our energy levels up, keep our hunger signals regulated, keep us full for longer. So really choosing food as close to its natural form as possible.
Catherine, just the final point to you. Do you think this advertising ban will work, that in 12 to 18 months we'll start seeing an improvement and a big difference across the UK?
I'm hoping what we'll see is the food industry respond. So we saw them do that in response to the sugar levy. So the requirement to reduce the requirement to charge higher prices for sugar sweetened beverages. What they did then was change the makeup of the beverages so that they could still sell them at the same price. So what I'm hoping is that this will cause industry change in terms of the constitution of the food, so that they are healthier, and then that will enable them to still advertise them. And I think we're also going to see another form of legislation. We hope it was talked about in the NHS 10-year plan, where large supermarkets, so your standard large supermarkets, the big five or whatever, are going to be required to monitor and do things in store to change the healthiness of the basket of goods that consumers purchase. We haven't had much detail yet on when that's going to come into force, when those supermarkets are going to need to report on that. But it'd be really interesting to see what effect that has as well. And we need to keep seeing this kind of drip of new policies that actually really shift what the consumer is offered and what the consumer has access to.
Catherine, thank you. My thanks to Marilia, Johanna and Chris here in the studio. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me and Brady and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.